You're listening to the Meditation and Attachment Podcast with George Haas. For more information, please visit our website at www.mettagroup.org. That's www.mettagroup.org.
So welcome everybody. This is Meditation and Attachment, Deepening Your Practice. It is March 11th, 2021, 7:35 p.m. Pacific time. And tonight the practice is going to be compassion for difficult people. There seems to be no shortage of difficult people lately. But I thought it would be interesting to actually touch into what it is that makes somebody difficult. Is it for us in particular, or is it something general? The way that I was always taught compassion practice, or really any of the Brahma Viharas, was a difficult person was somebody who, when I interacted with them, I had problems with them. So it was usually somebody specific that I knew, that I had some interaction with, that there was some conflict in the interaction. And that can span any of the other categories. It could be a close person or a friend or family, a neutral person, so A, B, C, or D in the Dunbar language. And usually what we talked about is our conditioning, so your own conditioning, interacting with their conditioning creates some kind of conflict in that. But there is also the macro side of that, the bigger side of that you have this way of being, this sense of ethics, this sense of value, of the values that you have, and you attempt to live your life in a way that is true to those values. And then you encounter people who hold different values of you than your own, and often they're in conflict. I wonder, as I've been thinking about this in the country that we're in this moment in history, and different things going on. For instance, I have traveled many times to Myanmar, and I have some friends there that have had to remove themselves from Yangon into the countryside because of the conditions that are there now. Here, of course, we live in a country where we have these two parties that have these very different ideas about how the world should be, and people take action according to that view that they have. I tend to be on the side of equality, and many people are on the side of inequality. I think that's a useful way of being. Coming from this Buddhist perspective of non-harming, engaging in the world in such a way that you don't create harm for other people. And yet, my experience often is that other people are actively engaged in harming, that creates a sense of difficulty for me. We do, in some sense, live in a militarized oligarchy. Even though we like to call it a democracy, it's actually, the structure of the government is a republic. So much of the money that we use, that it's raised through tax dollars, goes to support our military. In fact, a great proportion of it, the majority of the money that the federal government raises, is actually spent on the military. This is in contradiction to my own views of how this should be. And so still living in this country as a hopefully full member, how do you reconcile that? How is it that you would like it to be done? I'd like to talk about it in this equation between people who are interested in equality and people are interested in inequality. One of the things that's remarkable about our system and the way that it has operated is that it started as a system that was based on inequality, and it was designed to support that. And so it's been subject to these forces of people like myself who think that equality is a better choice, and pushing into changing the way that the system operates in a way that we tend more toward a distribution where people have, and this is one of the things that relates to attachment, the time, energy, and resources that are necessary to explore what's meaningful to them. This is really where I'm thinking. How do you distribute the resources in a society where everybody is free to then pursue the things that they find meaningful? And what are those bases? What is the basis of that? If you look at the typical monastic teaching, what they're talking about are food, shelter, clothing, and medicine. This is what is often talked about as the basics. So then, could we have a society where those elements are present and available for everybody? We do tend to live in a very rich nation, and it really isn't that the resources aren't there, it's the way that the resources are distributed. I would add nurturance to that as well, those basic things. Not sure what that means. There's a message in the chat. At the same time, our obligation to act in accordance with our ethical stance is present whether or not we encounter somebody who's harming or not harming. We're talking about compassion. And so what compassion means is that you're willing to hold the suffering experience of someone else in an attempt to help them hold the experience of their suffering, come back into a kind of emotional balance, and then be able to move toward some kind of skillful response to it. What we know about stress in relationship to people's cognitive mind is it reduces their capacity to respond cognitively, and they tend to become more reactive, more emotional, less monitored, less observed. So their mentalizing collapses, and then they become reactive and they respond from that reactive place. It creates the intention and action and the karmic thread that follows from an inconsidered response to the conditions of the present moment. And so when we react from that place with compassion, we're holding that space for the other person so that they can come back into a place of balance, and so that their mentalizing can come back online and they have a greater chance to form a skillful intention and take a skillful action and mitigate the negative karma that can come from unskillful actions taken. This would suggest, of course, that in a balanced state, they have the capacity to mentalize and understand how the action that they're taking, the intention that they're making, might play out, so that they can mitigate it with a more skillful response. But what we know from attachment study is that the adverse experiences of people's early life translate into a diminished capacity to mentalize. Mentalizing is to be able to track your own internal experience, track the experience of someone else, to be able to track the interaction between your experience and the other person's experience, and the effect that those two mind states have on each other. Often I think that one of the difficulties in maintaining this stance of being open to offering compassion to a difficult person is that the interaction with a difficult person has a negative impact on your own capacity to mentalize. And if you notice that your mentalizing is collapsing, then you're likely heading to a place where you become unable to not react, not create some unskillful action, which then escalates the exchange between the two of you. And then you find yourself in relationship to the difficult person, creating negative karmic threads for yourself in the interaction. So one of the things about compassion, of course, is that it's an empathetic exchange, and that you have to be able to regulate not only your own experience in doing that, but also the experience of the other person. And sometimes if that's overwhelming, it's better to disconnect from that and come into a place of sympathy rather than a place of empathy. So you're coming out of the experience of compassion, which is shared, into this solo experience of what's happening, which might be easier for you than to be able to regulate your response. That all making sense so far? So compassion is an empathetic experience. It requires that you're able to attune to the other person. It requires good skills at emotional regulation so that you can hold not only your own experience and regulate it, but hold the experience of the other person and help them to regulate, to come back into balance. You don't need to solve problems for other people as much as you need to be able to hold emotional space for them so that they can come back into balance. Their cognitive mind can come back online. One of the things about being activated often or feeling unsafe, unseen, any of these things, is it tends to activate the attachment mechanism. And what we know about that is that the attachment mechanism goes off, and then you're seeking comfort and protection from your attachment figures, but at the same time, it shuts off the capacity to explore. One of the reasons why I think that interactions with difficult people become so blown up is because when the threat is there, or their fearfulness is there, the capacity to explore turns off, and then that process through which we would find solutions or ways of handling it are no longer available to us because we're seeking protection. Anger is often the response that we come to. In compassion, the far enemy, though, is not anger, it's cruelty. And so you may find that in interactions with difficult people, rather than coming to a compassionate capacity or a compassionate response to them, your mind falls into the tendency to react in cruelty. You see this in the world, these extraordinary examples of cruelty in response to difficult experiences. In Myanmar now, you see the army opening fire on protesters. This kind of cruelty, the coming and taking people without any explanation or actually any way of tracking or knowing where they've been. I was reading in the paper that police are defecting and attempting to leave the country and going to India and seeking political asylum because they were unwilling to open fire on the protesters, and so they were being punished by the authorities, their own authorities. In fact, they were punishing by their own groups since they are the authority there. So this is a very constant and dynamic topic, this compassion, particularly in these difficult situations that we find ourselves in. In our own country, there's, I tend to think of them as hard right or really fascist, the fascist end of the Republican Party engaging in destruction of this collaborative agreement of government we have as challenging as it often appears. The use of violence, the use of intimidation. We are a country, America anyway, is a country that is armed to the teeth. There's like 3 guns for every adult in the country. It's an amazing thing. This isn't true of other countries. And then the deaths related to guns in this country is, I think it's more than 10,000 a year. When you compare it to other countries that really, if it's a lot, it's 100. So it's at a whole different magnitude. How do you hold this experience, right? Is it just simply putting it out of mind and not paying attention to it? And then putting it out of mind, then not responding to it in any way? And then you have in front of you somebody who is really holding this view that I would call the desire for inequality. You may have guessed that I am actually advocating that you come to this view of equality, the need for balance, the need for a distribution of resources in our country so that everybody really has the capacity to pursue things that are meaningful to them. How do you then hold this experience of somebody that doesn't want that at all and actually would take that from you if they could? So that's the dilemma with difficult people. How do you hold that space without needing to shut them off, without needing to come into a place of cruelty in order to manage the relationship? Christian.
Would you say that like overall people's attachment status would explain almost all of this? Or do you think if you know, magically everyone's attachment stuff was figured out, that there would still be these issues?
I notice in certain certain attachment strategy would lend themselves more toward an inability to mentalize, and so you, for instance, some of these conspiracy theories that seem to grab people's attention and actually drive behavior, to me it's very simple to find them completely without credibility, and yet some people do find them to be credible. And I would, or at least I think about that in some sense as a mentalizing issue. If you can't understand the nature of propaganda, which is to tie something that's easily provable to something that is not provable, and in the hopes that the belief in what's true in one aspect of it will carry over to the other aspect of it. And then you can't mentalize that well enough to really pull it apart and tell the difference. Some of these conspiracy theories seem quite outlandish and um, completely unbelievable. I mean, that's how I tend to respond to them, and yet it is even amongst some of the students I have, it's conversations that we have. But often I think there's the mentalizing isn't so underdeveloped that it isn't that you can't tell whether it's true or not. There's another aspect of it, which is that you can tell whether it's true or not, but if it's useful for you getting what you want, then you're free to use it to get what you want. And that would suggest another kind of deficit in terms of being able to come into a place of compassion. Empathy, we talk about it in these three levels. The first is this visceral response to the experience of somebody else's physical or emotional pain. But if you don't feel your own emotions, you don't feel empathy. You can't feel empathy, then it doesn't matter what you do to the other person, because that automatic braking system, which is empathy, doesn't engage. If you do something to hurt someone else and you're empathetic, you feel their pain in your body, and it acts as a brake that you don't continue to harm the other person. But if you don't feel that, there's no brake. If you don't feel your own pain, your own emotional experience consciously, then you become very cognitive, very cold. It's possible to be quite calculating in what it is that you're doing in an attempt to get something that would be satisfying to you. And there's very little regard or really very little experience of other people. And so you're free then to act in that way. But that would take a higher degree of mentalizing rather than simply not being able to tell what's true and what isn't true. But all of this comes from that early conditioning experience and the attachment outcomes that are less than secure. Secure people, of course, are empathetic. They mentalize well. That isn't to say that you couldn't come to the conclusion that your group is better than other groups, and so that your group is entitled to more. Your group is entitled to so much that other groups don't have enough, and still come in a way of justifying yourself in that belief and still operate in a basic sense of security. I think that there are so many factors that condition what's valuable and what isn't valuable. If you're not interested in reflecting on that and you just assume that that's actually the way that it is, for instance, one of the beliefs that we have is that the first person to discover the resource is then entitled to own the resource and benefit from it. But why is that useful? We live in a society where the distribution, I'm old enough to where the distribution of resources was dramatically different than it is now. When I was a kid, as unequal as it was distributed, the top 10% had about 70% of the assets, and the bottom had about 30%. If you look at it the way that it is today, the bottom has 12%. That's a huge difference, right? The upper 10% has like 87% of everything. You look at the top centile, they have 50% of everything. You look at the top 100th of a percent of our society, they have 20% of it. They have more in the top 100th of a percent than the whole bottom 50% of the country has. It's an extraordinary inequality, which has mainly been accrued through the tax system. When I was a child, the top tax rate was above 90%. And so there was a distribution of income between the bottom fifth and the top fifth, which was about 20-1. Now it's like, depending on who you read, 450 times the bottom from the top. Real wages have declined because there's been no pay increases. We talk about the $15 minimum wage quite a bit, but we've also had the same wage for 20 years. But inflation hasn't been zero for 20 years. So every year that the wages it raised, the actual earned income in relative dollars declines. So depending on where you are in the bottom 50%, you've lost half to 70% of your earning power over that period of time, whereas the top has gone up by hundreds of percentages. It's certainly not fair, right? But some people believe that that is an appropriate system. It does come with, 2 million people in prison and a militarized police force that routinely kills people on the streets. All of those things are part of this. I'm talking about this in terms of the difficulties that we face and the meaning that it has in these interpersonal relationships we have when these views that people have are so different. Can you be in relationship to somebody that wants to strip you of your civil rights? And how do you be in relationship to them if that's what's happening? Still understanding that if your intention is to be an ethical person, that your intention is to be a compassionate person, you're not relieved of the obligation then to in some way respond in this situation to that person in a compassionate way. How do you respond to somebody who is the source of their own suffering through their own actions? This is the conundrum of compassion for a difficult person. So I think that because it depends on the conditions of the present moment, in the present moment, can you hold the compassionate space? Can you allow yourself to be empathetic with the person who is suffering? And can you keep your balance and not be knocked off balance by the experience of the other person's suffering? If you can do that, then of course you can hold the space. And if you're knocked off balance by the experience of the other person's suffering, then you actually don't have the capacity for compassion in that moment. So it becomes less a cognitive understanding of whether you appreciate or you don't appreciate the point of view of the other person, but the experience of the person in front of you in the moment that you're there with them, and allowing this process of compassion to unfold, the attunement to the other person, the allowing of the empathetic exchange, the experience of their suffering, and your then willingness to hold the suffering experience of the other person and to help them come into emotional balance so that their cognitive mind can come back online and their capacity to mentalize can come back online. It may or may not make them less difficult, because if they're cognitive mind comes back on and their capacity to mentalize comes back on, and they still think that they should have more than everybody else, and that as a result of that, other people should not have enough, then there you are with them, and the experience of them. Doesn't relieve you of your obligation to act on behalf of the community. But hopefully it will keep you from slipping into a reactivity and then creating a negative karmic thread for yourself. It is possible to oppose ideas and actions that people take with kindness. They don't have to be opposed with anger. And in fact, to oppose these ideas with kindness is actually more likely to produce the capacity to engage in these activities for the duration of time that it's going to be necessary to engage in them to get anything to shift. I grew up in the 50s, and so my adolescence was in the mid to late 60s, and there was, peace and love and this sort of hope that we could end war. At the time we were talking about the Vietnam War, and the inequality was great, but not nearly what it is now. And so if you look at the trajectory of the last 40 years in this country, all of that has been eroded. And we're in a much less advantaged place now than we were 40 years ago. And that happened through a succession of decisions. In some sense, this agreement that we all make for these things to happen. There's a Zen saying, which is that everything is the way that it is because that's how we all want it to be. In some sense, all of us together, the accumulation of all of our actions end up in this place where we are. One of the things that energized the anti-war movement was that there was a draft, and so you would be called up. We don't have a draft now, so maybe you don't know how they work, but there's a lottery and they assign a number based on your birth date, and then they call through the numbers to get enough people to go into the military. The army that we have now is a volunteer army. And the way that they've made that work is by taking people who need to come into the army and mainly based on economics. And so it's a very different population that's in the army now than that you get from a draft, which runs across the whole society. The educated classes, the college kids of the time, sat out this anti-war movement until they couldn't get enough soldiers for the war, that they removed the exemption for college students. And once they removed the exemption for college students, it energized the class that had power to do something about it. And so that movement against the war took shape based on that. They eliminated the draft because it eliminated the opposition to the war machine. That's why we have a volunteer army. If everybody was called up and everybody had to go and there were no exemptions, we would not be able to engage in as many conflicts as we engage in, because people would not tolerate it. But as long as it's a disenfranchised group that has to go, there's very little opposition to it. So this piece of actually taking on these difficult um, structures in our culture and attending to them and formulating a response to them so that we can be present for what's actually happening and present for the permissions that we're giving. If you pay your taxes, you are part of the war. You're supporting it. And how do you hold that sense of it? That you're contributing actively to this thing that is causing so much harm. And then what do you do to mitigate that? Since it creates karma. So this is this topic for me of difficult people, difficult situations, and the need then to be able to respond still in a compassionate way. So we practice that in formal practice, formal sitting practice. Mainly in formal sitting practice, we're not focusing on the compassionate response. We're focusing on the willingness to respond in a compassionate way. How do you do that? So we take in an understanding of the difficult person we're going to focus on, and over again reinforce the mind state of compassion and hold the experience of that in relationship to the difficult person in an exercise of developing this capacity to be willing to hold the suffering experience of someone else. The untrained mind tends to just reflexively turn away from pain, to reflexively turn away from suffering. And here we need to override that and remain open to the compassionate exchange, willing to be in the suffering experience of someone else. So that's really what's at issue in this practice. So we'll pick a difficult person to work with. You do want to be able to succeed in holding the space. And so don't pick somebody that immediately throws you into cruelty or immediately pulls you out into sympathy. See if you can pick somebody that you can experience the difficulty of them and then still hold the mind state of compassion. So go ahead and take your meditation posture and we'll begin. So how did that go? Christian.
I have so I got pretty concentrated and I almost kind of had a headache. So I was wondering if I was doing it too much, and I kind of backed off and found maybe a more relaxed, I don't know, it seemed like a jhana to me, if that's a thing. My question is, how does getting into a jhana from this mind state actually help me out in real life in being more compassionate? Am I not sort of overshooting what would be the actual experience of being compassionate with someone?
Well, you're developing concentration, so you're able to place your attention where you want to, and you're also training yourself to be able to have agency in which mind state you hold, so that when you're confronted with somebody's suffering or some difficulty, you have agency to hold the mind state of compassion and then to be able to respond from that place. Whereas if you couldn't do that very well, you could easily get knocked out of the capacity to do it. That would be the main reason why. Also, one of the things that can happen is that you just reflexively turn away. You're not even really conscious of doing it, but you have the you empathetically experience somebody's suffering. It exceeds the window of tolerance, and you just cut it off. Then the other person experiences that as rejecting, but their empathetic experience is unwanted by you. It can happen so quickly and be subtle enough that you don't even detect that that's what's happening. And it really does change the whole tenor of the exchange. So it really is sensitizing yourself to that and really being able to be aware of it when it's there. That whole process, really. Is that good enough?
I think so. So are you saying that, like in the jhana, you're building concentration, and you're saying that in the actual practice of having compassion for someone actively, like when you're interacting with them, concentration is actually an important part of that process?
Right. Well, you want to be able to place your attention and say, hold the suffering experience, but also you want to be able to hold a mind state. And so in order to maintain the object of meditation in this way of practicing, you have to be able to maintain the mind state. So you develop the capacity for that.
Okay.
Good. Someone else? Jacqueline?
Go ahead, Austin. I think he was gonna.
Oh.
Hi, George. I was wondering if you could point me to some additional reading on today's topic. I'd appreciate it.
Compassion?
If, yeah, I'd like to work on that personally.
Okay. Well, let's see. The jhana practice that I teach is mainly taught by Indika Sayadaw, and he has a let me put that in the chat. Let's see here. But his manual is on metta practice. What's going on here? So if you Google U Indika Sayadaw and metta, you'll get the manual. And then just substitute compassion practice for the metta practice. Empathy training is really done through noting feeling states technique. So
Thanks a lot.
okay. In order to be able to experience compassion, you have to be able to experience your own emotions in real time. And so depending on where you're starting, that may be the starting point. Just doing tons and tons of noting feeling states technique, so you have real sensory clarity of your own emotions, and then you can begin to separate the 4 different types of emotion that you want clarity with: reaction to the present moment, self-generated emotion, empathy, and then the somaticized emotional experience. Someone else? Jacqueline?
Yeah, thank you so much last week for correcting me on not trying to create situations and do scenarios, because that really helped me this time around.
Oh, good.
I think I understood now. It's like I'm focusing on the mind state that I'm in when I'm encountering that difficult person. And you might still, like, I did still see not necessary situations, but that feelings that arose when, I was having a difficult interaction with them. And what I discovered is I was either trying to fix the situation or run away from it. I was either like, trying to find I wasn't being able to stay present either way, whether I
Right.
was trying to fix it or remove myself. I wasn't present. And so, and then I also found myself like really judging the other person and wanting to fix them, you know?
Right.
And so instead of having that, I just tried to accept the person as they were. And then, yeah, it reveals a lot about myself. And it just allowed me to accept the person as they are, and just kind of not be moved by what the other person is doing. I'm in my state of compassion, regardless of what's going on around me. So thank you. And
Mhm.
hopefully, as I practice, I can sustain that.
Good. Yeah, really the idea is that you help them to emotionally regulate, and then they're back in shape and they can solve their own problems. You don't have
Yeah. That's so true.
to.
And not expecting people beyond what people's limitations are. They are who they are. So accept them as they are.
Right. Good. Someone else?
I'll go.
Laura?
Hi, George.
Hi.
It's Lara. So today I had an experience I've been having with my neighbor downstairs, because I have a Zoom and I do a martial arts class, and I hear her go ding 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 back to me, and I get it. Like, the lobby has come up and knocked on my door and said she's a little upset, and so today I was like, dun dun dun, I hear you, but it was reactionary. And then I was like, oh, I get it may be disturbing. And I called the lobby and I said, could you just tell my neighbor that it's only going to be an hour and I'm not meaning to. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, good. To do this. And anyway, I was just thinking of her in this meditation now. And I work in a home with foster girls, and they also react. And I have the same experience as Jacqueline just now. She's like, I want to fix it. But I guess you're saying this is sort of regulating them by just sitting with whatever's coming up for them,
Right.
kind of thing. And then tonight,
helping
I also,
them emotionally regulate if you can.
if I can, right. How do you, just by sending them?
Well, empathy,
Mhm.
you attune to them. So we're attuned. Can you tell my attention is on you, your attention is on me, and we can experience that. And then
Yes. Got it.
opening to an emotional exchange, which is unconscious and automatic. Then I have the sense of my own emotions, and then I have the sense of your emotions. I can read partly your emotions by your facial expression. Can't see your body, so there's no input there. But then a feeling state in my body arises, which I associate with you. And that's different than my own emotions.
I see.
Then I bring my emotional regulation skills to the experience. So if I have the empathetic experience is not as intense as you would feel it, or as my own emotions. So it's easier for me then to bring my capacity to regulate that experience. And then as it's exchanged in our empathetic exchange, you get my emotions, but you also get your emotions back in a more regulated state. And that exchange,
I see. Got it.
Brings hopefully both people into balance. Of course, if you go the other way and the suffering experience overwhelms you, and then you're dysregulated.
Right. That's what I've done. That's the worst. But I found myself tonight too saying, like, though it was to her, I came back to me. I'm like, please, whatever that, may you be free of pain and suffering. And because I guess today I had a hard day, so it was nice.
Good.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
And then maybe a plate of cookies would be helpful.
I had Brussels sprouts for dinner, so that was good.
Well, I mean, leave a plate of cookies by her door.
Yeah, that's true. I see. Exactly. Good idea. Follow through. Absolutely. Thank you.
It's only an hour day. I'm so sorry. Right. So you're not giving up anything up and trying to make peace.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, great. That's a good idea. Friendly neighbor. Okay, thanks.
All right, everybody, thank you so much. Let's see what's happening. The level 2 class is sold out, so you can be put on a waiting list, and you'll get first dibs for the next class that's coming up if nobody drops out of this class. And then in April, at the end of April, I think April 24th and 5th, I'm doing a weekend meditation and addiction retreat, which is focused on relapse prevention and also on working with the attachment conditioning that causes addiction. In June, I have a retreat coming up. There's still quite a few spaces left for that. It's a little early yet for that to fill up, but if you're considering it, it's a Saturday to Saturday in the middle of June. We do have scholarships available for the retreat, so take a look at that. We're going to start another level 1 in July, and we'll do the 3 day-longs of the level 1, and then we'll do the meditation and attachment for coupling, which is for everybody. And then I think in the fall we'll begin another Dharma Maps series of day-longs. So that's what's coming up. I have this class. I also have the class on Tuesday. We're starting a meta cycle in the class on Tuesday next week. This class next week we'll finish with compassion, and then the week after that we'll start looking at the enlightenment path and set aside temporarily the attachment stuff. Thank you for coming. I offer the class on a dana basis. Dana is the Pali word for generosity, so I offer the teachings freely, but I do hope that you'll make a donation to support me and the work that Mettagroup is doing. There's a link on the website or in the email that you might have received about the class. Of course, if you're not resourced, please come to the class and don't sweat it. We as a community are happy to support a place for you to practice. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Good night. Bye, y'all.